Facebook. Eric, can you speak to that?
Yeah. Um, there are training videos that we've posted online on our YouTube. Um, there's also we're going to also put up a recording of this presentation. Uh, if there's any directed questions or specific questions that you have, I do a fairly good job at monitoring the email for the support, and I'm I can take questions and calls, and I can give you a walkthrough if you have questions. Uh, I can do my best, and if I don't know the answer, I can always follow up with Lawrence and try and get you the answers that you need.
Sounds good. Thank you.
He doesn't call me Lawrence very often.
No, usually it's Dad, but
Uh,
Oh, there we go. All right. It's 1:58. We'll give people a couple more minutes to straggle in. Hello to everybody else that is already in. We have 50, 57 participants right now. So we are recording. This will be available on YouTube, so that you will have that. Refer back to it. Uh, a You can also follow my blog. Appears I have not been as prolific this year as I have been in years past, but it's because I suffer from OLD. All right, it is 2 o'clock. All right. All right. All right. So let's go ahead and get started then. It is 2 o'clock Pacific Daylight Savings Time or Standard Time. I am Larry Rolfing. For those of you that don't know me, I run a 10-lawyer firm. We're in Santa Fe Springs, which is Southeast Los Angeles County. I've spoken more times than I can count before NOSCR on a variety of subjects, including cross-examining vocational experts, 406B fees, ethics, substance abuse, a couple of other things, but mostly the vocational expert stuff. And I just want to start out by saying that when your client loses, you lose at step 5 of the sequential evaluation process. There are a few people that lose at non-severe, not many. Most people that lose, they lose at step 5. And my attitude is that I don't mind losing if I'm losing for a good reason. If it's a fair fight, had my shot, and the judge makes a reasonable decision to deny the case, and I can understand it and appreciate it and intellectually devour it, then a loss is that's part of the process. But I refuse to lose on a lie, and that's pretty much what my attitude is and has been for a very, very long time. So because of my notoriety in the area, I've been in touch with directly or indirectly with some of the heavyweights in this area of law. Eric Schnoffer emailed me. I got a workup from Ralph Wilborn on this subject. Um, the first thing I'd like to do is to cover what 24.3p does. 24.3p says that 004p is wrong. It's not the right interpretation of the regulation. And I've been following the Federal Register, and I have not seen that 404-1566D. And today, I'm just going to refer to the Part 404 rather than the Part 416. The Title 16 regulations are, for the most part, and for purposes of today, identical to the regulations that govern Title II cases. So I'm just going to cite the 404 regulations. So 404-1566D says that the commissioner will take administrative notice. Let me go ahead and read. Will take administrative notice of reliable government and other information. And that is to take notice of unskilled work at the sedentary, light, and medium ranges of exertion. It doesn't mention heavy or very heavy. It doesn't mention skilled or semi-skilled work. It just mentions unskilled work at those three levels of exertion. And yet the commissioner has used the DOT for a very long time for past work, how work is generally performed in the national economy, and as the foundation. And I have long fought for and been hopeful for that I would be part of the process that toppled 004P. And I want to tell you that some of you are bemoaning the death of 004P. I, for one, am jubilant. I'm excited. I'm excited because it's going to bring on a whole new level of excitement to the game. Cliff and I were talking before we started today. Some of the judges are concerned. They don't know how this is going to play out. And I have a pretty good idea how it's going to play out. It's going to play out in our favor, in our client's favor. But the problem is that all of us are going to have to as Magic Johnson used to say, I imagine a day when everybody plays above the rim. And that's what we're talking about today, is we're talking about playing above the rim. So 24.3P says we do not, or 24.3P says we do not want to discourage the use of occupational information that is reliable and commonly used in the vocational profession. In addition, our adjudicative experience since we issued SSR 004P has shown that requiring our adjudicators, VS and VEs, to identify and explain conflicts in the DOT is time consuming. At the hearing level, the requirements of 004P have led to unnecessary remand. Well, you're just crying now. I don't care about that. The world of work is more complicated than the DOT and the SCO would have you imagine. The first problem is that 004P and 24.3P have this odd penchant for clinging to this idea that the DOT describes the maximum requirements of work as it's typically performed. I was a TA in the English department. I was a TA my sophomore, junior, and senior years of college. I think I have a pretty good grasp of the English language. I don't know what maximum of the typical means. It's a nonsense phrase. Typical is either the median, the mean, the average, or the middle, something like that, but there's no maximum middle. Typicality is typicality. And just to back me up on that, I would cite the DOT Appendix D, where the Department of Labor, the Employment Training Administration, emphatically says that the DOT was written to describe the typical requirements of work in the occupations studied, in the industries studied. So I don't know I don't know where they got the word maximum from, but Russell's going to talk about the scope of regulatory rulemaking in a few minutes, but I just want to get through this. The data sources that we need to know about, a couple of them are mentioned in 24.3P. The OEWS, the Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics, is mentioned in 24.3P. The OEWS is a source of occupational information. It has been around for a very, very long time. uh, and describes the numbers of jobs that exist in the economy. Are you still running into vocational experts? Just click on your show your hand. Just curious. I still run into vocational experts that want to use the Occupational Employment Quarterly, the OEQ. And the Occupational Employment Quarterly by U.S. Publishing is statistical trash. It's not reliable. It claims it's using OES data, which is the name that the OEWS used to use. It claims to use OES data, but it doesn't. It's using the current population surveys and the census collection of data, and the occupational numbers are just flat wrong. And they also use, of course, the equal distribution method for deriving job numbers, and that is just absolutely wrong. It is not a valid way of assessing the number of jobs in the national economy. But the OEWS is a valid basis for estimating job numbers. And I want you to be able to use this information. So I'm going to show you where it's at. Let's see, share. And we're at that one. All right. Beautiful. Oh, no. Yeah, share. Got to click on share. One of these days I'll figure out how to do this. So this is the OEWS. This is for May 2023. If you read 24.3p carefully, you'll see that they refer to the May 22 job number data, and then they use and in the URL it says the word current. The 2022 data is not the current data. The 2022 data is a year out of date. The OEWS reports a year behind. So if we go to production occupations and scroll down and just pick one randomly, electronic workers is used a lot. So this is what the OEWS looks like. Electrical, electronic, and electromechanical assemblers except coil winders, tapers, and finishers. There's 267,000 jobs in the national economy. The mean hourly wage is $21.03 an hour. These are the industries where people are employed in this occupation. These are more industries with the highest concentration. There's a map because California has the most jobs. Texas is second, so I guess Texas Instruments isn't as big of an employer as we thought it was. And so there's all kinds of data here that is helpful. And this is what the OEWS is talking about. And so if somebody says there are 50,000 jobs in an occupation that's in electronic or electrical, electronic, electromechanical assemblers, and the SOC code is 512028, this is the kind of data that you actually want to be looking at. So that's the OEWS. The Bureau of Labor Statistics also publishes the OOH, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Outlook Handbook in 404-1566D, paragraph 5. The Occupational Outlook Handbook is on the same level as the DOT. It's not first on the list, but it's fifth on the list. It is an example that is listed. And yet the courts have always looked down their nose at using the Occupational Outlook Handbook. They've never been willing to look at it the way that they've looked at the DOT, mainly because it's more difficult to use. So the yeah. So the Occupational Outlook Handbook sometimes reports just one SOC code. Sometimes they group them together. And it's difficult to use because of that. So in this group, which is electrical and electronic installers and repairers, there are actually 5 different SOC codes. And each SOC code, there's data associated with it. And this is what we call the employment projections. Again, for the same SOC code, 492092, and then by industry. This is important because we're going to use the employment projections to defeat job numbers. The DOT is organized to reflect occupations that were studied by the Employment and Training Administration, the ETA. The ETA is a North Carolina state agency that has a contract with the Department of Labor to do this kind of data information. The ETA is also the publisher of not only the DOT, but another publication called the ONET. Same agency, same part of the Department of Labor, same contract. In fact, I'm showing you now the status of the Dictionary of Occupational Titles use in Social Security Disability adjudications. This is the official Department of Labor website. And it says, if you are looking for current occupational information, you should use the ONET. Russell's going to talk about Kaiser in a minute, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly right here. One of the things that is important to remember when we're talking about the agency's ability to pick and choose is the question of who is the expert agency? Who is the expert agency in gathering the data, compiling the data, and reporting the data to OMB standards, but the Department of Labor? It's not SSA. SSA tried to do an end run when suggesting the OIS, the Occupational Information System. It didn't go anywhere because they're not the expert agency. Labor is the expert agency. So this is really critical stuff. The other thing I want to touch on, because this is why the OEWS data and why the employment projections data is so important, is the industry designation. Industry designation on any occupational title is in parentheses. And it immediately follows the occupational title, and it differentiates between 2 or more occupations with identical titles but different duties. Because of this, it is an integral and inseparable part of any occupational title. I'm sure you've had vocational witnesses. I refuse to call them experts because they're not statisticians. They have a soft science degree. They're not mathematically oriented. Many of you went to law school because you're not mathematically oriented. That's okay. But we're going to have to do some math somewhere along the way. And Eric's going to help us, has helped us do that. So the industry is an integral and inseparable part of the occupation. So a lens inserter, it's designated in the DOT as being as being in the optical goods industry. And yet they'll tell you that there are 20,000 lens inserters in the national economy. How do you get that? Well, that's based on my education, training, and experience. That's wonderful, but how did you get 20,000 jobs? The courts have been pushing back for a long time about using job numbers, but there are cases that have used the industry to beat back vocational expert garbage. And 24.3P allows us to use where the DOT points, which is to the employment projections, to the OEWS, and to county business patterns. So, all right. So we've covered the employment projections, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, employment and wage statistics, OEWS. The other the other thing that we need to be concerned about in terms of job numbers, job requirements, excuse me, is the occupational requirements survey. The occupational requirements survey is a joint venture with SSA and the Department of Labor, in particular the Bureau of Labor Statistics, compiling data about the requirements of work. And Jeff Truthen and I have had several conversations about this subject. And he said publicly, most recently with the Chicago Bar Association, that the ORS data is compiled by sending questionnaires to Human Resources. And Human Resources fills out the questionnaires and tells labor, the BLS, what's required. And I have lost many cases, and I've fought many cases, and I've won many cases on the idea that the ORS is reported according to Office of Management and Budget criteria. They meet OMB standards. Vocational expert testimony does not meet OMB standards. Vocational expert testimony is Beestick versus Berryhill refers to vocational experts as having local experience. I call it anecdotal experience. I saw it once, and therefore I know exactly how a million jobs are performed. And that is just utter logical nonsense. 24.3P unlocks the door. 24.3P allows us to bring in the ORS data and force the judge to deal with it. Instead of saying, well, the vocational expert's testimony is consistent with the DOT, and 004P tells us that as long as the vocational expert's testimony is consistent with 004P, then I can rely on it. That's actually not what 004P says, but there we have it. So this is the BLS website. They have the 2018 data set is complete. That's the first wave. It's been complete for 6 years now. The 2023 data set is complete. It's the second wave. How they are going to merge these data sets, I'm not sure. The 2024 data set just came out. Sometime in the last 30 days. I actually stumbled across it last week preparing for this session, was to stumble across the 2024 data set. So that is new. There are only 100 SOC codes that are studied. I haven't figured out if there's one that was never studied before. A lot of it is filling in the blanks on other occupations that were already studied in the first or second wave, or both of the first and second wave data set. All of this was supposed to be done by 2020. The first wave, the second wave, the third wave were all supposed to be done by 2020. It's 2024, and we've just started third wave. So when is this data going to be published in something that is useful? I don't know. Is this data going to be used by vocational experts? Already happened. I've had a number of vocational experts tell me that they use the occupational requirements survey, and I get a special sensation running up and down my spine as I salivate at the idea of cross-examining on the occupational requirement survey, because these vocational experts actually don't know what the data actually says. They haven't read the collections manual. They haven't read the handbook of methods handbook. They haven't read any of those documents, and so they don't know what they're talking about. But you do. You should. You must. You must, because Alan Dershowitz, famous Harvard Law School criminal law professor, has practiced law and argued many cases before courts of appeal, et cetera, says that you have to know the field better than your expert, better than the opposing side's expert. Because if you don't, they're just going to eat your lunch. They will destroy you. You don't know. You can't, you're not ready, willing, and able to respond to their lies. I had a hearing last week. I was very confident going in that I was going to win this case, multiple impairments, a lot of things going on. And the vocational expert started to testify, and the judge said the issue was whether or not it was a quiet work environment. Turned out the claimant needed a quiet work environment. And the first occupation out was a dresser. And again, I was excited to hear her say a dresser because I know the job is obsolete, and it's on the emergency message teletype saying that if a vocational expert identifies a dresser, that the ALJ is going to need more explanation. I also know that a dresser is in the occupational group of word processors and typists. I also know that a dresser has a job description of addressing envelopes, cards, labels, etc., by hand or by typewriter. And I'm old enough to remember having a typewriter and being in a room adjacent to someone using a typewriter. And I know that those suckers are loud. They're, for SEO purposes, they're moderately noisy. So I know that the SEO was going to identify a dresser as working in around moderate noise. We don't use typewriters in my office anymore. I hope you're not using typewriters for much of anything in your office anymore. But the vocational expert went back and said, "Okay, Judge, yeah, thank you. Let me look at that." And then she's on the telephone, and she says, "I'm sorry, Judge. I'm just not going to be able to identify any work today." And her apology was deafening. She was apologizing for not being able to identify work because that's her mindset. That's the mindset of most vocational experts is, "I'm sorry, my job is to identify jobs and I can't do it today. I'm so sorry. I have to apologize for that." Instead of being proud of the fact that I know this field very well, Your Honor, and I can tell you that combination of impairments, there's no jobs left. But instead she apologized. And we, as attorneys, as non-attorney representatives, the courts don't care whether you're an attorney or not anymore. If you're holding yourself out as being a professional representing claimants, you're going to be held to the same standard. And so we need to know the data, and we need to be able to force it down their throat. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment here. Let me see, stop share. There it is. There's the button. And there are two things that we're going to be working on in terms of going to war with 24.3p in our pocket. One is to do the data, and one is to resolve the problem when we've inherited a case at the appeals council level or some other level in the agency process. Court is clearly too late to submit rebuttal evidence. But the question is because the 24.3p is clear, the agency expects all of us to raise these issues. The cases expect us to raise all of these issues before the administrative law judge, and in exceptional circumstances, before the appeals council. So Sims versus Apfel over 20 years ago ruled out appeals council issue exhaustion. We don't have to exhaust specific issues, but the cases in and around Sims, before Sims, after Sims, tell us that we have to raise the information. So in terms of the enforceability of, and this is both Eric Schnoffer and Ralph Wilborn have pointed out to in the materials that I've reviewed, that the agency is trying to legislate, issue exhaustion or issue forfeiture or issue waiver inside of SSR 24.3P. And I'm going to take a brief break to get a drink of water, and Russell's going to discuss that issue. Just as a way of introduction, Russell's last name is Rolfing. He is my youngest son. He's recently graduated from the University of Wyoming Law School. Well, while he was in law school, he was writing appellate briefs for me in a number of cases that we won at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It isn't as easy as it was 15 years ago. They've tightened up the standards, but he graduated with honors, and while he was in law school, going to school full time, writing briefs for me about 15, 20 hours a week, he was also a graduate assistant wrestling coach for the Wyoming wrestling team. So that takes a tremendous amount of discipline. So I want to turn over the mic to Russell and let him talk to you about Loper Bright, about Kaiser deference, and about 24.3P and 004P. Go ahead, Russ.
Thanks, Lawrence. I like to call him Lawrence while we're in the office. Elsewhere, I'll call him Dad, but while I'm in the office, I like to call him Lawrence. Give the illusion that there's no nepotism here, even though we all know that it is. So yeah, 24.3P makes it clear, as Larry was saying, that they expect the representatives to raise relevant questions about or challenges to a vocational expert's testimony. And the question is, as Lawrence alluded to, is that a substantive rule that is subject to the requirement of the APA, section 553, that requires notice and comment, or is this interpretive? Is it an interpretive rule? So we were talking about this and looking at Kaiser and Loper Bright, and so to determine whether it's interpretive or if it's substantive, some courts have pointed to substantive rules are those that grant rights, impose obligations, or produce some other significant effect on private interests. And interpretive rules are that they interpret a regulation that's ambiguous. And Kaiser reworked our cabined our and imposed some more requirements in order to be eligible for our deference. The first of which is there has to be a genuine ambiguity. And it's not, Kaiser makes it clear that it's not just, I think the language that the court uses is, it's not enough that it just makes the eyes glaze over on the first read. You have to exhaust statutory construction, and there has to still be a genuine ambiguity. So here in SSR 24.3P, in footnote 10, which is referencing that requirement that we raise relevant questions about and challenges to the vocational expert's testimony, they say, we expect you to raise those because that's when the vocational expert is ready and available to answer them. And it furthers, and this is I think what's relevant here, furthers the efficient, fair, and orderly conduct of the administrative decision-making process. And they cite 404-1740 and 416-1540. And so when we look at, if we look to those, that's outlining the rules of conduct and standards for representatives. And section B is the affirmative duties. And subsection B3 is what's being cited here. And it's saying that they expect representatives to conduct themselves in a manner that furthers the efficient, fair, and orderly conduct of the administrative decision-making process. So it's echoing that language. And it seems that that's what would be the ambiguity. But if we look deeper into these regulations, excuse me, we can see that this is not just interpreting that statute, that it is attempting to impose a new obligation on, or not impose the obligation on claimants or the representatives rather, and shift it away from the ALJ. When we look to still in 404-1740 or 416-1540, it under the affirmative duties, it directs to 404-1512 for blindness and disability cases, and 404-1512 refers to the responsibility for evidence. And it states what the claimant's responsibility is in subsection A, and in subsection B, it's the court's responsibility. And subsection B3 is what we're talking about here. Other work, determining whether the claimant can adjust to other work in the national economy. Now that they'll take into account RFC and age education, but that is under subsection B, the responsibility of the agency of the ALJ, not the responsibility under subsection A for the claimants. Okay, so we know that this is their responsibility. So it is the agency's or the commissioner's responsibility and or burden at court to show an ambiguity in order to be eligible for our or Kaiser deference. Now, going back to 1740, it talks about one of the responsibilities of the representatives is competency. So to provide competent representation and must know the significant issues in a claim. And that's also I think one of the areas that the commissioner will try to point to an ambiguity. What are the significant issues? But when we look at the case law surrounding even preceding 004P, we know that for Britain and Shaibi, we know that there's a lack of pretrial discovery in administrative cases, and so Shaibi recognizes that it's very unlikely that a representative will be able to effectively cross-examine on the fly a vocational expert. Excuse me. So I mean, based on those cases and other progeny of those cases, it seems unlikely that the expectation of the agency of representatives to raise those questions would operate as a waiver. as the agency seems to be doing here. So because I think that the commissioner would be hard pressed to actually identify an ambiguity, a genuine ambiguity in the regulations. Because it's shifting that obligation, that duty to show that there's adjustment to other work in the national economy, that this is imposing an obligation on representatives and claimants, and is therefore not interpretive. It's substantive. And so, when we get a case at the appeals council or going to court, more at the appeals council, where the representative didn't effectively cross-examine or raise those issues about the ORS, the OEWS, like Lawrence was talking about. We point to Kaiser. And say this isn't interpretive, this is substantive, and is avoiding the notice and comment required of Section 553 of the APA, and is therefore not binding on claimants. And we know, and separately, we know that 004P is wrong because 243P is saying that it's wrong. So this isn't going, yes, we should embrace this new paradigm of asking about conflicts, cross-examining about the ORS, the OEWS, but when we get to appeals council and it's lacking, that's not the end of the battle. We still can present that data and raise Kaiser as a defense to the waiver doctrine, the waiver that the commissioner is trying to impose.
All right, well, thank you, Russell. So the bottom line here is that in terms of if you've gotten yourself into a position where you have to litigate over the issue, you do have a defense. You do have a defense to the allegation of waiver, of forfeiture, and it is. But I want us to not be in that position. I want us to be in the position where we are proactive, that we're going after these vocational experts, and we're trying to push the envelope to show that the vocational expert testimony is not worth the space on the hard drive that it's taking up. All right. Let's see, share. All right. Everybody's familiar with B-stick, right? Say yes, please. All right. B-stick is the Supreme Court decision that overruled the Seventh Circuit rule that show me your underlying data or your testimony will be rejected. And in B-stick, this is a case coming out of the Sixth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit rejects the Seventh Circuit, and the vocational expert said that there were 240,000 bench assembler jobs. The bench assembler job, because I've read the transcript, I've looked at the underlying cases. It's final assembler in optical goods. It's the same. They're right next to the lens inserter occupation. 240,000 jobs is actually the entirety of the occupational group. And so that's just garbage. 20,000 is garbage, and 240,000 is an outright lie. The vocational expert should be prosecuted for perjury. The vocational expert also testified to 120,000 sorter jobs. The sorter job that's described is nut sorter. And so nut sorter, this is Oasis, the skill trend product. It's similar to Job Browser Pro. It's going to report very similar job numbers. And skill trend says that that nut sorter represents in other food manufacturing, 618 jobs. In merchant wholesalers, non-durable goods, 1,200 jobs. And in farm product raw material merchant wholesalers, 121 jobs. For a total of 1,996 jobs. That is the total number of jobs that our friends at SkillTrend say are apply to nut sorter. Not 120,000, 1,996. So let's look at nut sorter in the DOT. So the vocational expert says nut sorter, and there it is, there in parentheses is canning and preserving. And so, well, it actually says can ampersand preserve, and so we have to look that up. So we go to the DOT. Oops, where's my DOT at? Yeah, we go to the DOT, and it says I lost it. All right, I'm going to go back to the DOT. Lost my own page. This is again the Department of Labor website, and we scroll down to industry designation. It's red because I click on it a lot, and we look for can and preserving. So can ampersand preserve means canning and preserving industry. This designation includes occupations concerned with cleaning, shelling, processing, canning, or quick freezing and preserving condiments, fruits, jellies, nuts, pickles, preserves, soups, vegetables, frozen dinners, and related products, and processing and preserving seafood such as clams, crab, fish, oysters, and shrimp. We go back to Job Browser Pro or Oasis, merchant wholesalers and farm product raw material merchant wholesalers are not in the food processing industry. They are wholesalers. So we have an apparent conflict with the DOT from Oasis, Job Browser Pro, SkillTrend. And so I would argue, and I have argued, that Job Browser Pro's unexplained conflict with the industry designation contained with the DOT cannot be credited. There's no reasonable basis for resolving that conflict. Now that 004P is dead, long live 243P, I think we revert back to the old case law. There was a split in the circuit in the 1990s before 004P, whether a vocational expert, if the judge had vocational expert testimony and the DOT that the judge could just pick willy-nilly, that's arbitrary and capricious. Other circuits, including the Ninth Circuit, said there had to be a persuasive basis for resolving the conflict with the DOT. Earlier, and that's in Johnson versus Shalala. In Terry versus Sullivan, an earlier case, Terry said that the vocational expert had identified transferable skills to cashier 2, and in court the claimant said cashier 2 is an unskilled occupation, and so the court said, well, we're going to credit it because the DOT is the commissioner's own resource, or the secretary at that time, Secretary of Health and Human Services own resources. So we're back there. We're back there because we have eliminated the elevation of the DOT to the source for information over all other sources of information. And we've leveled the playing field so that we get to consider everything. All right, so nut sorter, canning and preserving. This is county business patterns. Job Browser Pro, SkillTrend is using other food manufacturing. These are NAICS codes, North American Industry Classification System codes. That's 3119. The zeros are just placeholders. They don't actually count. 3119 in county business patterns is in fact other food manufacturing, but it's over inclusive. Snack food manufacturing, probably not. Roasted nuts, yeah. Yeah, but that's only 18,000 jobs out of a other food manufacturing classification of 251,000 jobs. Coffee and tea, no, that's not what they're talking about. That's not what they're talking about. Perhaps seafood product packaging, 3117, Job Browser Pro, Skilltran, Oasis didn't identify that. But still, even considering 3117 and 311911 roasted nuts, we're at a total industry employment of 47,000, 48,000 jobs, not an industry that is 251,000 jobs. The identification of 1,200 jobs or 600 jobs, it's probably doesn't fit with the data, doesn't fit with the data correlation. So let's look at the job numbers that are in the OEWS, which 243P recognizes, and the EP, which is part of the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And we scroll down to 3119, and there it is, other food manufacturing. And for all jobs in this group, which is 519061, is inspectors, testers, sorters, samplers, and weighers. In other food manufacturing, there are 8,500 jobs and 8,490 jobs using the employment projections or using the OEWS. When we look at Skilltran starts with, for other food manufacturing, 6,801, and then divides by 11 total DOT codes to come up with 618 jobs per DOT code. Job Browser Pro is using the equal distribution method at the occupation industry intersection. And so when we look at the data, we say, okay, well, Skilltran was a little light on other food manufacturing. Perhaps if that industry designation applies, the number should be 8,500, but it probably should be 4% or 20% of that, 20%. So we end up with a much, much smaller number by looking at the total industry employment and what industry actually applies. This actually is Job Browser Pro used to designate, and they weren't consistent about using 2, 3, and 4, and 5 digit designations for their industries. And so they would identify 311 and then 3119. And vocational experts would tell me that those are two different industries. Like, no, they're not. One's the parent and one's the child. They're overlapping. You're double counting. And with the current versions that came out in the last 3 years, they've cleaned that up. They also cleaned up one of the criticisms was that Job Browser Pro's reports didn't clearly say they were Job Browser Pro reports. And I spoke with Jeff Truthan. The most recent versions, last 2 years, have said everything says Job Browser Pro on it. So and it's dated and it's got a version number on it, so we know exactly what it's coming from. Okay, so that's just an example of why we have to be vigilant about submitting data that contradicts the vocational expert, because Justice Gorsuch complained in his dissent in BSTIC that the occupational numbers that were provided, and thanks to its conclusory nature, for all anyone can tell, it may have come out of a hat. and thus may wind up being clearly mistaken, fake, or speculative evidence too. It did come out of a hat. That's a very professional way of saying something that I would have said, but I won't repeat what thought came to my mind. The vocational expert testimony is it comes out of a hat, and we are duty bound to take it out of the hat and find out whether the testimony is in fact reliable. There's a question that the statement in 24.3p gives the aura of infallibility to vocational expert testimony. The courts have consumed the Kool-Aid. For those of you that are under 55 or so, I guess, you may not remember the tragedy of Jonestown in Guyana. And Pastor Jones took a large group of people to Jonestown in Guyana. There was a congressional investigation, and to defeat the congressional investigation, Jones had everybody drink Kool-Aid laced with poison. And so men, women, and children died because they drank the Kool-Aid. And so that's the origin of the phrase, when people have a mass delusion of they drank the Kool-Aid. The courts have consumed large quantities of the vocational expert Kool-Aid, and the agency has glommed onto that. The reason that the agency likes the word that the questioner said, patina, this facade, this shine, this aura of infallibility or respectability or reliability or having a foundation, is because it gives the ALJ a wide swath of discretion. I was friends with a person that became an ALJ. It's no longer an ALJ, but he and I used to talk about in the late 80s and early 90s about a case called Swenson versus Heckler. And we used to talk about doing Swenson. It was comparing the vocational base to the grid rules. We were running after the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail ended up disappearing in Moore versus Apfel. But this person that was to become an administrative law judge said, when I become an ALJ, I'm really gonna re-educate the vocational expert corps. I'm gonna really give them a run for that. I'm gonna change the system by really holding these vocational experts to giving testimony that is reliable and truthful and has a foundation. And he was on the bench, and I ran into him, and he told me, didn't have to do it. It's much more subtle than that. It's a nod, it's a wink, it's a tone. I get the vocational expert to go where I want the vocational expert to go with a wink or an inflection, and they do what I want them to do. It goes back to my hearing last week where the vocational expert apologized for not identifying work because she thought that her job was to identify work, not to describe what really happens in the world of work. So yeah, there's no end to the dishonesty of the ALJ corps, the vocational expert corps. And BSTIC says that we have to show one of two things in order to beat down the vocational expert. We have to show that the testimony is feeble or contradicted in order for the testimony not to clear the very low burden of substantial evidence. It's not even a speed bump. It's a rock in the road. And we want to sharpen up that rock so it pops the tire of the vocational expert as they go over it. But that's the test, feeble or contradicted. Ford in the Ninth Circuit also talks about the testimony that is uncontradicted or unchallenged is is going to be substantial evidence, going to clear the burden. And so we can do this, we must do this, because we have to submit contradicting evidence into the record. Who among you would go to a hearing where there was a CE that said your client could do medium work, there was a DDS finding that said your client could do medium work, and you've got a younger individual with failed back syndrome, you're not going to get a treating physician opinion. And I know the treating physician rule is dead, but my God, you have to do something. We have to do something. This person that we're representing today, tomorrow, next week, next year is somebody else's parent, somebody else's child, somebody else's sibling, somebody else's friend. And we need to take the attitude that my client today is my best friend. And I will be damned if I'm going to allow the agency to run roughshod over my friend. I'm not going to allow the vocational expert, in pursuit of protecting his or her gig with the Social Security Administration, to make up nonsense about the world of work that isn't supported. So we have this data available to us. We have the OEWS, we have the employment projections, we have the occupational requirement survey, and we have the ONET. The ONET is probably the only part of the data set that is referred to in 24.3P for the crosswalk, but has never really caught on with Social Security, even though it replaced the DOT as far as labor was concerned, because the ONET doesn't describe work with respect to the exertional requirements. It doesn't fit with the grids. It doesn't fit with the medical vocational guidelines, because the ONET doesn't really care about sedentary, light, medium, heavy, very heavy. It doesn't care about any of that. What the ONET does a wonderful job of doing is describing other aspects of work. Contact with others is huge. In a nut sorter, clearly nut sorter has very little contact with others, and there's 120,000 of them in the national economy. No, there's not. No, there's not. That's 1% of inspectors, testers, sorters, samplers, and weighers, we'll just call it inspectors from now on, have occasional contact with others, and an additional 1% have no contact with others. The Occupational Outlook Handbook describes inspectors as representing 595,000 jobs. And I can do 1% in my head because I just moved the comma over to the left 2 places and I got it. It's 5,955 jobs have occasional contact, and 5,955 jobs have no contact with others. So there's 12,000 jobs in the national economy that have occasional or no contact with others. We haven't even touched exertion yet. But if the person has occasional contact with others, it's a devastating limitation to the ability to perform work activity. The reason for that is that the commissioner recognizes in POMS on mental limitations, that working in coordination with or proximity to others is a critical requirement for performing work activity. Critical. No man is an island unto himself. Now, John Donne in the poem For Whom the Bell Tolls was talking about Black Death, and the death of another man lessens me. But the reason it lessens me, the death of another man lessens me, is because we're interconnected. In the world of work, in the world of unskilled work, they're all connected. Each and every person in the unskilled work environment is connected to somebody else. Another one that is very critical in terms of the ONET is the ability to work with a group or team. The inability to engage in teamwork is a fairly frequent limitation. How many inspectors, testers have to work with a group or team, do not have to work with a group or team? Your vocational expert will tell you, oh, nut sorters, there's no teamwork in that. There's no teamwork in that. Well, that's contrary to the incumbent surveys that are in the ONET. The ONET is comprised primarily of incumbent surveys. These are people actually doing the job. And the people that are actually doing the job tell us that working with a group or team is important in 14% of jobs, very important in 22% of jobs, and extremely important in 64% of jobs. Extremely important. There's one more category that I use very frequently with respect to the ONET, and that is the time on job. The ONET is the only Department of Labor publication that talks about a 40-hour work week. 96.8p talks about a 40-hour work week, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, or an equivalent schedule. That's a 40-hour work week. Most of the Department of Labor data is going to talk about a 35-hour work week. Well, a 35-hour work week, I was a political science major, so my math isn't very good, but I'm pretty sure that 35 is less than 40. 35 hours is not a 40-hour work week. So in order to comply with 96.8p to identify full-time work, well, that tells us right here that for inspectors, they're all full-time. They're all full-time. But many occupations, they're not. And so we need to be very cognizant of that. Job Browser Pro, Skilltran, our friends at Skilltran, when they do a full-time, part-time, their full-time, part-time split is at 35 hours because they're not using the ONET to discern that particular they're not using 40 hours to do that split. But we need to have that information. And 24.3p says that if the department, the data set does not actually reflect our regulatory paradigm, that we need to make adjustments. We need to explain that and figure that out. But you have a choice. You can let the vocational expert make it up, or we can use the ONET to get at least incumbent understanding of what is required of this particular occupation. Here's a mail clerk. Mail clerk is a reasoning level 3 occupation. It's used frequently. And here we see that Skilltran is going to tell us that that full-time is 64% of jobs. And so can we rely on 12,000 or is it less? It's probably going to be less because there's a difference between a 35-hour work week and a 40-hour work week. A 35-hour work week is not full-time or an equivalent schedule under 96.8p. Okay, what do we do? We got all this data. Oh, I want to show you one other report before we get too far into this. I'm going to this is really important. Eric, my number 3 son, because I believe in nepotism, worked really hard on this to get this done because the 24 data set just came out. This is an ORS 2018, 23, and 24 report. And we're just going to run inspectors, testers, sorters, inspectors again, just for fun. And so here we can see that all inspectors require either basic people skills or more than basic people skills, because 62 plus 37, 62.7 and 37.3 adds up to 100. And 65.4 and 34.6 add up to 100. I want you to assume that the person can occasionally tolerate contact with coworkers, supervisors, or the public. Can this person perform work? Well, how about frequently they do not have basic people skills? Because that's what an occasional contact with others means. And I've read the ORS, and I've read the ORS for the occupational code 00-0000. That's for all occupations. And the number of people that require basic people skills and the number of people that require more than basic people skills, just like inspectors, adds up to 100. If you don't have basic people skills all the time, you're not employable. The idea that people with significant mental impairments that are limited to occasional contact with others can actually engage in full-time work activity in a non-sheltered workshop is just not true. It's not true. According to the ORS, inspectors engage in sedentary work. On the 2023 data set, less than 15%, but in the 2024 data set, they actually have an estimate that is valid, because less than 15% says that's the maximum, but it's probably less than that. We can't be sure how much less than that. We're absorbing all of the standard error measures from the other ones that we've reported, and it might be 15, but it's probably a lot less than that. We're not sure. In the 2024 data set, we get a solid number, no less than sign, 7.5%. So if there's 560,000 jobs and there's 8%, that's 40,000 jobs. And we haven't even talked about skill. That's just sedentary jobs. Inspectors engage in unskilled work in the 2023 data set in 22.3% of jobs, and plus less than 0.5%. Call it 23%. So it's 23% of the 8,000. So that's less than a quarter. So even if we consider every sedentary occupation that might exist in the occupational group of inspectors, it's less than 2,000 jobs. It's less than 2,000 jobs. And that's in every single industry, not just the industries that are particular to nut sorter. The vocational expert that said that she'd done her own study, the reason she couldn't present that to counsel in BSTEC is because it didn't exist. She was lying. She was pulling it out of her hat. She pulled it out of her hat for final assembler, and she pulled it out of a hat for nut sorter. She lied. And BSTEC was deprived of years. He got a partially favorable decision. He gritted out at 50, but he should have gotten benefits before 50 because there were not a significant number of jobs. If you have a sedentary SRT limitation, simple repetitive tasks, simple work, and sedentary, I don't know about your circuit, but in the 9th Circuit, there's not enough jobs. It's less than 20,000 jobs. And that's using Job Browser Pro or SkillTran, Oasis. But if you actually use the data set that we have in terms available to us, compiling the OEWS, the employment projections, county business patterns, the ORS, the ONET, the answer is the person's disabled. There's not a significant number of jobs for that person to perform, even if they're 22 years old. There just isn't. I have a question. I'm always happy to submit a post-hearing response to the vocational expert testimony. I don't want to spend 2 hours every hearing crossing the VE using alt-voc sources. I am sure the ALJ doesn't want that either, but I don't want to risk precluding the opportunity to challenge vocational expert testimony. What do you suggest that we do in the hour now to preserve your ability to challenge at hearing to preserve the ability to challenge post hearing? That's a great question. Let's see, this is my blog, California Social Security Disability Attorney, .blogspot.com. I post links to this on the Martin listserv. I post links to this on the private listserv that Eric and I run. And my suggestion is to ask them. First, you need to know. You need to have some idea. You need to familiarize yourself with the data. And it's going to be an iterative process. You're going to have to do it time and time again before you can get comfortable with the idea that occasional contact with others obliterates the occupational base. That standing and walking 6 hours in an 8-hour day does not allow for any medium work, not unskilled work. It might allow for truck driver. It might allow for some other kinds of semi-skilled work, but it is not going to allow for maids, housekeeping cleaners, janitors, floor waxer, or any other of those myriad of medium unskilled jobs that might be specified. So here's what I've recommended on my blog is your testimony consistent with the occupational requirements survey? Well, I don't know. I don't really use the occupational requirements survey. It isn't done yet. And so I don't trust it yet. Okay. Does the occupational requirements survey publish data according to OMB standards? I'm not sure. Well, do you think you should know that before you criticize it? You should know what their methodology is before you just willy-nilly describe it as not meeting your standards? Because your testimony is not consistent with OMB standards, is it? Have you studied this occupation over 100 times? Because that's what's in the ONET is each time it's updated, it's over 100 studies. Is your testimony consistent with the ONET online? I don't use the ONET online for purposes of Social Security hearings. Do you use the ONET for other purposes in your practice as a vocational certified rehabilitation specialist? Yes, I do. Why don't you use it here? Because Social Security told me not to. Well, 24.3P takes the foot off of your neck, and now you can. Is your testimony consistent with the occupational employment and wage statistics? Because we know now that the OEWS just doesn't report the aggregate job number. It reports the job number by 4-digit industry codes, some 3s, 1 or 2 5s, but not just the whole group. Is your testimony consistent with the employment projections that are appended to the Occupational Outlook Handbook? Is your testimony consistent with the industry designations in the employment projections? Well, counsel, we're not interested in the projections of future employment. That's the interesting thing, Judge. The employment projections report the current job number, which is 2023, and they project to 2033. We could ignore the projections. I agree with you. But let's talk about what they count right now. The employment projections count right now. They're not statistically significantly different than the OEWS. Is your testimony consistent with county business patterns? Vocational expert says, well, county business patterns is 2 years out of date. That's true. The county business patterns that was released in March of 2024 is the 2022 data set. And the data that will be released in March of 2025 is the 2023 data set. But county business patterns reports its aggregate employment numbers based upon your tax returns as an employer. You report on Form 941 or whatever tax form you use to report wages to employees and the number of people that you're reporting for, and your report to the IRS contains your industry, your NAICS industry code, North American Industry Classification System. Your tax preparer puts your NAICS code on your tax forms, and the IRS reports that information to Census, and Census reports the data from your tax return into county business patterns. That's where they get their numbers. And finally, you have to ask, is your testimony consistent with the Skill Trend products? Job Browser Pro, Oasis, Is it consistent? And if you want to check later, because, well, Your Honor, I could spend the next 2 hours or 3 hours or maybe all day, but I would really like to look through this testimony. And I know 24.3p says I need to raise the issue here, but this witness has identified 6 occupations. It's going to take me 5 hours to get the data coalesced for these 5 occupations, because I had no idea that the vocational expert was going to identify these 6 occupations or 3 occupations or 1 occupation, whatever it is. And I'm surprised. And I'm going to make a post-hearing submission, and I'll make a request for a supplemental hearing unless you decide that the vocational expert testimony is not persuasive, because the test is not whether it's substantial evidence. Here, it's whether it is a preponderance of the evidence. And I want to remind the court, I want to remind you, Your Honor, that 404-1566D doesn't say we'll take vocational expert testimony to ascertain job numbers. It says the agency will do it by administrative notice. An administrative notice looks at the occupational outlook handbook. It's listed as number 5. It looks at county business patterns, number 2. It's listed in 24.3p, the OEWS. And the occupational requirements are listed in the DOT, the ONET, and the ORS. So let's do what the regulation actually says and take administrative notice, because it turns out that the number of jobs in the national economy is not an expert question. It is, in fact, a statistical fact that reasonable people with reasonable 5th grade math skills can derive. We don't have to get into standard error measures or any of that other complicated statistical stuff, or why when the other 4 categories add up to 97.5%, how the remaining category can be less than 5% when there's clearly only 2.5% left. Why don't they just say 2.5%? Because that 2.5% is not statistically reliable. There's not enough data to allow the agency to report that. So, but let's take administrative notice. Let's do this right. Let's do this right. Let's see. Got another question here. Eric and Russell are screening questions, and if you have a question, use the chat feature to bring it up. The ONET uses SOC codes. SSA wants DOT codes, which are job specific. What if there are many DOT codes in the SOC? Industry context method? The industry context method is in fact the skill trend method. That is the way that it works. So my rhetorical question to the vocational expert says, well, these are DOT job numbers. What source of job numbers are you aware of that reports numbers of jobs by DOT code other than skill trend? There aren't any. Well, the SOOC does. The other publication by US Publishing deals with the 137 sedentary DOT codes, and their methodology is opaque to me. They are very low job numbers. They are very easily compared to the county business patterns. They're very easily compared to the OEWS and the employment projection numbers. So that's viable, but in order to estimate job numbers, the vocational expert has to use SOC codes and has to divide and conquer occupations within that SOC code to get a DOT job number. And so, yeah, the industry context method works because the DOT designates the industry. And even in SVP2 occupations, such as small product assembler 1, the DOT doesn't identify, it says any industry. Any industry does not mean all industries. Any industry means that it's 5 or more. That's what any means. There are the DOT data set, which I can't find anymore. It's no longer downloadable from Widmark, but there were 5 fields for industry, and if they got to more than five or more, it was only 4. If they got to 5 or more, they just put down any. And so we read the DOT narrative for clues as to what industries small product assembler 1 works in. And it says assembling small products like carburetors and coils and other things sounds like automobile manufacturing. Sounds like things that have internal combustion engines. Sounds like machinery manufacturing, not food. They don't exist in the textile industry. They don't exist in the food beverage industry. They don't exist in the retail industry. And how many of the 260,000 production workers, all other, because that's the occupational group, 519199, are there in manufacturing? 90,000. How many of them are in manufacturing not involving food? 20,000. And the number of jobs as a production worker, all other, is an extremely small number of jobs. It does not exist in significant numbers. So yeah, you have to use the DOT crosswalk that's embedded in the ONET. You have to use industry, and then you have to apply the ORS to it. Let's see, we got another question, really good questions here. How do you address the lack of experience in rejecting rebuttal evidence? This is going to be an evolving question, and it has been an attack that has been substantiated in the past. But since Loper Bright has come along, and we're going to wipe out everything that we understood before, we're going to start on tabula rasa. The concept is administrative notice. The concept is not hire a vocational expert. The entire Kerner doctrine was founded on the idea that you can't force impoverished people to go out there and do a labor market survey and job analysis on 3,000 unskilled DOT codes. I don't want to say unskilled. I'm going to say SVP 1 and 2 DOT codes, because some of them do not qualify as unskilled under the definition of unskilled work in 404-1568. We can do that in a second, but so if the commissioner is going to take administrative notice, and administrative notice is, I can look it up and I can do some simple math, then then I can look it up. I don't have to be a cosmologist to tell you that we had a full moon 2 nights ago. I can look it up in an atlas. Or actually, I looked up in the sky when I was doing my morning walk at 5 a.m. and saw that there was a full moon in the sky. I don't have to be an expert to know, to have common sense understanding of these occupations require 7 hours of standing and walking at the 10th percentile. Sounds like there's no jobs that require 6 hours, that allow a person to stand and walk 6 hours or less in an 8-hour day. Okay. Why is the standard preponderance of the evidence as opposed to substantial evidence standard? The substantial evidence standard is a standard of review. And the regulations are quite clear that the standard that the judge uses is preponderance of the evidence. I don't have the regulatory site in front of me. I think Eric addressed that in his message to me, but the standard by which fact finders operate is not to say, I think there's substantial evidence for this proposition, so that's going to be my finding. No, the ALJ, just like a jury, has to decide which is the more persuasive evidence. Which is the more persuasive? I am persuaded, because it is quite different for an ALJ to say, I believe that the vocational expert's testimony is substantial evidence, and therefore I'm adopting that as my finding, than it is for the ALJ to say, I've looked at the vocational expert testimony and I've looked at the rebuttal data submitted by the claimant, and I believe the vocational expert. I want them to say that. I want them to say that they believe that there are 45,000 lens inserter jobs in the nation. I want them to say that, because that's just saying it makes it true that you believe that. And there's just no way that any reasonable person can believe half of the things that these vocational experts claim. Okay. Did we have any other questions, Russ? No. Okay, good.
Yeah, we do. We do. We have one more from Derek. How do you address deference at the ALJ level? Also, what impact do you believe Garland v. Vanderstock will have on our industry?
Somebody's gonna have to tell me what Garland says.
It's okay. It hasn't actually been decided yet. It was an ATF case that was argued before SCOTUS.
Oh, Derek, Double D, my good friend, Double D. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, sir?
There are a number of cases out that are pending out there, and the scope of Loper Bright and the scope of our deference that survives is in fact an open question. And we get to actually get on the edge of the knife and cut through some of this morass and make our pitch. The law review articles and the professorial blogs, they're not really talking about Social Security cases. They're more interested in search and seizure cases, ATF. They're more interested in toxic torts, the EPA cases. They're more interested in commerce cases. Which agency has the vast majority of ALJs in federal employment? Social Security. Social Security does. We have almost all of them. There's just very few in any other agency. And so we are actually, I think it's also a fair question of whether the Administrative Procedure Act applies to Social Security, because Social Security is the template for which the APA was actually passed. And so that's a fair question. The Supreme Court has said, well, assuming that the APA applies, then this is, and that's in Heckler v. Campbell. So yeah, so we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be, Russell and I were talking about this, is that it's not a sexy field, but it's an incredibly important field. 5 to 10% of Americans will go on disability during their lifetime, either for the rest of their life until they reach retirement age, or die, and some of them recover. But roughly 5 to 10% of Americans will be impacted by the need for disability benefits at some point in time in their life. And so the question is are we going to use the resources that we have available to us to push back? And so when you start a hearing and you're in your office, or you start a hearing and you're in the hearing office yourself, have your laptop open, have your computer open, have Job Browser Pro open, have Oasis open, have it open, run it through, make sure it's working, make sure you have access, and take good notes. Write down the hypothetical question. Look up the DOT codes as the vocational expert is giving them to you. Open up, I'll make a shameless plug. Open up OcuCollect and run an everything report. And when you run the everything report, use Control F. Don't try to look for everything. Look for the things that matter to you, to this case. Production workers, by and large, don't engage in light work. There are very few of them that engage in sedentary work. There are quite a few of them that engage in medium work, but less than a quarter of them engage in unskilled work. So whatever number of jobs there aren't very many. And Job Browser Pro, using the occupational density model, recognizes that. So If all of the DDS doctors say 6 hours and your ALJ says light work, well, we actually need to know how many of the jobs require standing and walking 75% of the day. And so the answer is at the 10th percentile, they stand and walk 75% of the day. Judge Stan, in National Hearing Office in Chicago. I said 75% of the day. He says, where did you get that from, counsel? 8 hours times 75% equals 6. The doctor said 6, so 75% of the day. I mean, that's the level of non-math that even some of these ALJs, I think he's a former JAG, but anyway, it doesn't matter to me. If you don't know that 75% of an 8-hour day is 6 hours, I can't help you. But now that you've heard it, you know it. 50% of an 8-hour day is 4 hours, and 25% of an 8-hour day is 2 hours. So there we go. So that means that 10% of the jobs are eligible on this data set to satisfy the ALJ's hypothetical question. So I looked for short demonstration only in the ORS, and it turns out that 26.4% of the jobs require a short demonstration, or beyond a short demonstration up to 1 month. So 26.4% of the jobs are in fact unskilled. And how many of them are sedentary? Less than 0.5%. Less than 0.5%. How many of them are light? 11%. And 11% times 26.4% is 3%. So 3% of these occupations are actually light and unskilled. And of the 1,200 DOT codes that are light and unskilled, 405 of them are in this group. 405 of them. And we've now knocked that down to 6,000 jobs total. Light unskilled jobs.
Yeah, I know. She's doing some.
Hey, Carmen, can you turn off your mic, please?
Because they said that she had.
Eric, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, so I already knew the answers, but I pulled it up and I looked for it like I would in a hearing for an occupation that I didn't know, that I haven't done before, and there aren't very many. There aren't very many DOT codes that get mentioned. It's the same 25 or 30, 40 DOT codes that get mentioned over and over again, because this vocational expert went to a conference and they had a powwow, and the powwow is part of their blistering experience in the national economy. And they all agreed that there were, in fact, 20,000 lens inserter jobs in the national economy. It's just nonsense, just utter nonsense. How does 24.3p change the issue of light work can require more than 6 hours of standing and walking? Who said that that light work only requires 6 hours of standing and walking? I said to a vocational expert, and the vocational expert said, well, the DOT defines it that way. Really? I had no idea. That's really interesting, because I'm looking at Appendix C right now. Maybe you can help me. I'm reading it, and I don't see any mention of 6 hours of standing and walking in an 8-hour day inside of the definition of light work in the DOT. Let's see, exerting up to 20 pounds of force occasionally and or 10 pounds frequently and or a negligible amount of force constantly. Negligible is now defined in the ORS as 1 pound. 1 pound. Physical demands are in excess of sedentary work. Okay, even though the weight lifted may be negligible, it's light if it requires standing, walking to a significant degree. Well, that's not 6 hours. When it comes to sitting There's a lot of pushing and pulling of arm or leg controls. Okay, great. Sewing jobs. When it requires production rate pace entailing constant pushing or pulling of materials. Okay. All right. Great. The constant stress and strain of maintaining production rate and pace. I don't see 6 hours there. Let me see. It's got to be in the regulation. Let me check out the regulation. It's got to be in the regulation. Just bear with me, counsel. I've almost got it. I've almost got it. All right. Let's see. Light work involves lifting no more than 20 pounds at a time, weight lifted, good deal of standing and walking. Good deal. That's kind of vague. Okay. Or would involve sitting most of the time, arm and leg controls. If you can do light work, you can do sedentary work unless you can't sit or you have a loss of fine dexterity. Fantastic. I don't see it. I don't see it. There's no 6 hours. So where's it at? Where's it at? There's only one place that says that light work requires 6 hours of standing and walking. And I'll bet you $1 and a donut that it does not. What does it say? Can't type. All right. Light work, here it is. Since the full range of light work requires standing and walking off and on for a total of approximately 6 hours of an 8-hour work day. Okay, there it is. Interesting. It's in a ruling, not binding. Didn't go through notice and comment, and it's making a substantive change to 404-1567B and to the DOT, and the Social Security Administration is not entitled to construe the DOT. They don't get to do that. And sitting may occur intermittently during the remaining time. All right. 8-hour day, standing and walking 6. The remaining time is, let me do the math in the head, 8 minus 6 is 2. Sitting intermittently during the remaining time. Does that mean they sit all 2 hours? What does intermittently mean? Intermittently is a term of art in California workers' comp. Intermittently means up to half the time. Even as a non-term of art in California workers' comp, just giving its ordinary meaning, intermittently does not mean the rest of the time. Because the rest of the time would have been an easier, clearer statement. And it isn't intermittently during that time period, during the 8-hour day. It's sitting intermittently during the remaining time. And there are 3 flavors of vocational experts when it comes to the definition of light work and the definition of medium work, because we have the same sitting intermittently during the remaining time here in medium work. When a vocational expert hears 6 hours, some of them will assume that they mean 6 hours of standing and 6 hours of walking for a total of 8 hours in a day. Some of them will assume that when they hear medium or light, that they can stand and walk for 8 out of 8 hours because there's no limitation stated in standing and walking. None of them assume when they hear medium or light that the judge means not more than 6 hours in an 8-hour day. And if your judge asks, I want you to assume light work, your first question should be, I want you to assume that the person can only stand and walk for not more than 6 hours in an 8-hour day. Can they still do these jobs that you've identified here today? Yes. What's your source for that? What does the occupational requirement survey say about standing and walking in this occupation? I don't know. Have you looked? Have you looked it up? I have not. Okay, wonderful. Who would be better at estimating the requirements of work nationwide? You or the Bureau of Labor Statistics? I'm asking for a friend. Standing and walk, 6 hours, light work is not 6 hours of standing and walking. It's 6 hours plus intermittent sitting, plus the balance of where they're not sitting during the remaining time. Intermittently is not the rest of the time. Okay. It's just not, that's just not the way that's not what the ruling says. And I lost this case, Terry versus Saul, where I said the judge didn't specify 6 hours and the vocational expert identified work that was more than that, according to the ORS, is more than 6 hours that was submitted to the appeals council. And the court said, yeah, we don't like the ORS. It's not really on the list. And we presume, it's a rebuttable presumption that when the vocational expert says, responds to a light hypothetical or medium, in Terry, it was medium, that the vocational expert knows that the ALJ means 6 hours because the ruling has been out since 1983. It's been out for 40 years. So clearly everybody knows that medium means 6. It's like, I don't. I clearly don't, because that's not what it says. And the reading of 8310 to suggest that standing and walking is limited to 6 hours in an 8-hour day in light or medium work is a misreading of the ruling. I recently had a hearing. I said to the vocational expert, the judge said medium, you identified work. If the person is limited to 6 hours of standing and walking in an 8-hour day, can they perform these jobs? And the vocational expert surprised me. She went above and beyond the call of duty. She said, this person cannot perform any medium unskilled work. So the judge, really intellectually rigorous person, the DDS, the state agency, said about 6. Initially, reconsideration. The CE said 6. The treating doctor said 4. And so the judge said, I find that the person can stand and walk for, drum roll please, 8 hours in an 8-hour day. Just complete garbage. It's going up. It's going back up. That's just nonsense. There's no medical support for an 8-hour standing and walking. But the testimony of the vocational expert highlights the fact that Terry versus Saul was wrong. Terry versus Saul misread the world of vocational experts and assumed that they did their job honestly and competently and knew what they were talking about, but they don't. And it's time for you and I to put the lie to the test by submitting the data and asking the questions. We've been going at this now for an hour and 45. Any other questions you want to ask? You can turn your mic off and just ask. Anybody? Okay.
Can you repeat everything you just said?
Yeah, I could. Or Derek, you could pick it up on YouTube tomorrow. Eric's going to post it for you, and you can listen to it at your leisure.
Well, but thank you, Larry and Russell. This has been enormously helpful.
Larry,
Very
I have a question. I have
Yeah.
a question. So this is James Graham, and I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And
Yeah.
look, I've been doing this for a long time. And the thing is that everybody knows on this call that the judges try to hustle you through these hearings. Some judges literally put a stopwatch on them. I mean, 45 minutes. Counsel, your client is going to have a supplemental hearing if we go much longer. How much more time do you need? I said 15 to 20 minutes, Judge. Okay, we're having a supplemental hearing. And I said, we'd rather have a fair hearing than a fast one. And so I think that this seems to me to be a situation where, yes, we put the lie to the test, but there just isn't enough time in these hearings to do it, despite the fact that we're at record low numbers of cases pending at OHOs. So what do you say to that?
Bring it on. I'll do the supplemental hearing every time.
Yeah, but that's the generous ALJ. Other ALJs just cut you off and they're just done. You don't get a supplemental hearing. You're done at 45 minutes. I mean, my hearings are.
Your Honor, in light of the fact that you're terminating my examination of the vocational expert, I will be providing a supplemental brief post-hearing along with a request for a supplemental hearing and you can do what you want.
You know, my retort to that is this is a high volume practice, and most of us do it high volume, and the rise in the maximum fee helps a lot. But still, you know, it takes a great deal of expertise. And if I'm doing 3 or 4 or 5 hearings a day, yeah, and I'm doing that 4 or 5 times a week, you just don't have time to do post-hearing submissions. I mean, unless you're doing boilerplate letters or you know, canned letters or briefs. I mean, those exist. We have those, but
Well, if you use OcuCollect
yeah.
and run a couple of these reports, run the everything report. I don't recommend using the everything report because it's designed to give you everything in one place. But run the ORS 2018 through 2024 report, run the OEWS EP report to show, and then run Jump Browser Pro. And James, you and I had a long talk yesterday. Doing it right is going to take more time than doing it fast. But the first 2 times you do this, it's going to take a while. It's going to be a grind because you're not familiar with the data.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the 5th or 6th one, or the 10th one, or next month, if you've done 15 at an hour and a half a piece, you're going to find out that you can do them more quickly because experience is a great teacher. And so you're going to have to do it. It's easier to do it, just say, here's the data and point to it, than it is to extract teeth from a vocational expert. There was a question here that says there's not a one-to-one for NAICS to the industry designations that's used in the DOT. There was never a one-for-one in the industry classifications to the DOT because the DOT used its own unique industry classificatory system, which is why you see a lot of occupations designated as the clerical industry. It turns out that there is not a clerical industry, but there are clerical functions in every industry. So what do? Read the DOT description, figure out what industries they're in, use Job Browser Pro as your starting point. Use SkillTrans Oasis and say, well, Jeff Truthen says that these are the industries, and absent a compelling reason not to, I'm going to use the industries that Jeff has suggested. And so, yeah, that's the best way to do it, is to use the industries. I don't have any expertise in designating industries. I use what SkillTran offers up, and then I criticize them. So let's look at small product assembler, just because there are a couple things in here that are very helpful in terms of industry designations that you need to be aware of. All right, so let's see. We need to look at full-time, and we need to look at national and show report. All right. So SkillTran suggests animal food. Small product assembler is assembling small parts for carburetors, brakes, well, blah, blah, blah. Car parts. Animal food product manufacturing, nothing to do with that. Sugar, fruit, dairy, animal slaughtering, seafood, beverage, tobacco, leather, sawmills, veneer, wood product, chemicals, chemical manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, plastics, rubber, iron and steel, no, foundries, no, machine shops, maybe, turn screw, maybe, coating and engraving, machinery, manufacturing, commercial. Okay, some of these. All right. But look at all the job numbers on the side over here on the far right side. The job numbers are tiny. Look how little those job numbers are. I'm scrolling down. Holy smokes, there's one. 14,246 jobs in a single industry. What industry is that? Oh my God, it's temporary help services. What the hockey is temporary help services? Temporary help services. That doesn't seem right. I meant to have the NAICS manual up for you, but I'm going to pull one up So NAICS manual, I want to find out what temporary help services means. And I pulled up the NAICS manual. Here it is. And I'm going to search for, because it's 958 pages, and I don't have, and as James said, we don't have time to read 958 pages. So I'm going to go for temporary help services. And I'm going to go there and there and there. Come on. There we go. There. Okay. Here it is. Temporary help services. This industry comprises establishments primarily engaged in supplying workers to clients' businesses for limited periods of time to supplement the working force for the client. The individuals are employees of the temporary help services establishment. However, the establishments do not provide direct supervision to their employees at the client's work sites. Okay, well, this doesn't sound like sustained employment. This sounds like temporary employment. And in fact, the cross references say that if it's temporary to hire, that's in a different industry. So 14,000 jobs are not substantial gainful activity under SSR 96-8P because they are not sustained employment. And so we have to look at we have to strike 14,246 jobs from the 19,557 jobs that are listed by Job Browser Pro, in addition to all the food and other non-manufacturing related small product manufacturing industries, because there is not an adequate explanation that would justify including animal food manufacturing inside of a small product assembler. This is not necessary. It's not where they work. They're working in furniture. These are all retail establishments, aerospace product manufacturing. They're not in temporary help services. They're not in animal food product manufacturing. So how do you do it? You use Job Browser Pro and then put Job Browser Pro to the test, or Oasis in this instance. Okay. We are at 3:55, and I really want to thank the everyone that has joined us today. I'm going to stop the share. We're down to 52. No, that's 52 chats. We're down to 66 participants. I think at one time we had about 170. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions, lawrence.rolfing@rolfinglaw.com. Feel free to drop me a message anytime you want. I will do my best to answer all the questions that are asked of me. And get back to you. If you have a question about OcuCollect, you can direct those to Eric. Eric, do you have an email address with at the OcuCollect address?
Support@ocucollect.com. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Support@OCCUCOLLECT.com. If you send Eric a message, if you register for OcuCollect, you can just register and get all of the free stuff that's available on there. If you have a question, you can always ask Eric through the support mechanism that's built into OcuCollect, or you can send Eric a message. And if you ask nice and tell him that you participated in this session, he will probably give you a code for 14 free days. But you have to ask. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. But absent any other questions, any other burning desires from anybody here, I want to thank you again. This has been fun for me. I hope you enjoyed it, and you guys have a great day, and go get them.
Larry, Rob
Yeah.
Petrozelli. One, there was nothing shameless about this plug. I've been a subscriber for a couple of years now. It's a great product. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank you.
vote of
Nothing
confidence.
shameless about it. It's a wonderful tool.
Yeah. All right.